Fire her incompetent ass before she destroys this company. Maxwell Barnes slammed his fist on the gleaming conference table, sending coffee splashing across engineering schematics worth millions. Dr. Imani Wright's groundbreaking designs, the ones keeping Barnes Technologies ahead of every competitor, now stained with Colombian dark roast and pure hatred. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Imani Wright sat perfectly still as 50 eyes turned to her, the only black woman in a boardroom of white men who'd spent decades convinced of their superiority. Her MIT ring glinted under fluorescent lights as she calmly gathered her drenched papers, the same ring she'd earned graduating top of her class. The same hand that had signed 147 patents, now controlling global industry standards. Maxwell, I don't think firing our chief innovation officer makes sense right before the Williams merger, said Thomas Jenkins, CFO and occasional voice of reason. Chief Innovation Officer? Maxwell's face contorted with disgust. As of this morning, she's been demoted to junior engineer. I've had enough of her attitude, her constant challenges to my authority, and her ridiculous demands for credit on technologies that this company owns. Imani maintained her composure, though her heart hammered against her ribs. 8 years of revolutionary work at Barnes Technologies, designing microprocessors that transformed modern computing, creating encryption protocols now used by governments worldwide, developing artificial intelligence frameworks that competitors were still trying to reverse engineer. I believe my contributions speak for themselves, Imani said quietly, her voice carrying the surgical precision she'd mastered after years of being interrupted, dismissed, and overlooked. The Williams merger specifically requires my ongoing leadership of the innovation department as stated in Section 4.3 of their term sheet. Maxwell's face flushed crimson. You work for me. I decide who leads what department in my company. Your arrogance is exactly why I'm putting you back in your place. The room grew uncomfortably silent. Everyone present knew Imani's designs had transformed Barnes Technologies from a middling electronics company into a global powerhouse. Her neural interface patents alone were valued at $4.2 billion. Yet Maxwell Barnes, who'd inherited the company from his father, couldn't stomach the thought of a black woman being the actual genius behind his empire. Your place? Imani arched an eyebrow, her calm exterior masking a tactical mind that had anticipated this confrontation for months. And where exactly is that, Mr. Barnes? Junior engineer, basement lab, effective immediately. Your access to the executive floor is revoked. Your team reassigned. Your projects redistributed to people who understand the proper chain of command. Maxwell's voice carried the entitlement of someone who'd never had to earn his position. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Imani slowly closed her leather portfolio, the one containing preliminary designs for quantum computing architecture that would revolutionize the industry again. Designs Maxwell had repeatedly dismissed as fantasy, despite peer-reviewed validation from CERN and MIT. I see, she said with calculated restraint. And the 147 patents registered under my name that currently generate 86% of this company's revenue, will those also be reassigned to people who understand the proper chain of command? The board members shifted uncomfortably. Despite being predominantly white men over 50, even they recognized the catastrophic stupidity of Maxwell's vendetta. Imani Wright wasn't just an employee. She was the golden goose laying billion-dollar eggs. Those patents belong to Barnes Technologies, Maxwell sneered, revealing his fundamental misunderstanding of intellectual property law. You signed an employment contract. Imani allowed a small smile to form. Actually, I signed a very specific type of contract negotiated by my attorneys. I maintain perpetual licensing control over my innovations, with Barnes Technologies receiving exclusive implementation rights contingent upon specific conditions. That's impossible, Maxwell sputtered. Our standard contracts give the company full ownership. You're absolutely right about your standard contracts, Imani replied, opening her tablet to display a document that made the board members lean forward. However, my contract was personally modified by your father before he passed away. He understood the value of keeping me motivated. The boardroom erupted into chaos as executives demanded explanations. Robert Barnes, Maxwell's father, had built the company from scratch through strategic vision and respect for exceptional talent. His son had nearly destroyed it through entitlement and prejudice. "She's lying," Maxwell shouted over the commotion. "This is corporate blackmail." Thomas Jenkins, who had been at the company since its founding, cleared his throat. "Actually, Maxwell, I was present when your father signed that agreement. Dr. Wright's terms were unusual, but your father insisted she was worth it, said she was the future of this company." Imani had spent her career preparing for this moment. As a black woman in tech, she'd watched countless brilliant colleagues pushed out, their innovations stolen, their contributions erased from corporate history. She'd studied intellectual property law as diligently as she'd studied quantum mechanics, knowing her protection would never come from corporate loyalty but from legal precision. "Let me clarify what this means," Imani said, her voice cutting through the pandemonium. "If I'm demoted, Section 12(4) of my employment agreement automatically triggers a review of licensing terms for all technologies I've developed. Barnes Technologies would need to renegotiate licensing at current market rates, approximately $8.3 billion based on last quarter's revenue reports." The color drained from Maxwell's face. "That would bankrupt us." "Indeed," Imani replied. "Additionally, the Williams merger would collapse immediately, as their interest is primarily in my neural interface architecture. Without me leading that division with full authority, there is no merger." The board members looked at Maxwell with barely concealed disgust. His personal vendetta against the company's most valuable asset was threatening their stock options, retirement portfolios, and future compensation. "This is extortion," Maxwell hissed, but his voice had lost its conviction. "This is consequences," Imani corrected him. "I've tolerated systematic discrimination for 8 years. I've watched you take credit for my innovations during press conferences. I've remained silent when you introduced me as our diversity hire to potential clients. I've endured watching less qualified men receive promotions based on leadership potential while I was told to focus on technical work." Maxwell looked around for allies but found none. Even his most loyal sycophants recognized the existential threat his actions posed to the company and their personal wealth. "You can't hold these patents hostage," Maxwell tried again, his voice cracking under pressure. "We'll fight this in court." Imani didn't flinch. "A public court battle, where it's revealed that Barnes Technologies' core products were designed by a black woman you demoted out of personal prejudice? Where deposition testimony details the systematic discrimination I've documented meticulously for 8 years? Where financial statements demonstrate that my innovations generate 86% of company revenue while I was paid 63% of what male counterparts received?" The board members exchanged alarmed glances. Public exposure would be devastating. Their stock would plummet. Competitors would poach their talent. Government contracts would evaporate under diversity compliance reviews. Thomas Jenkins leaned forward. "Maxwell, I strongly suggest you reconsider Dr. Wright's demotion before this situation escalates further." Maxwell's face contorted with the special rage of mediocre men confronted with exceptional women. "You're all being manipulated. She planned this. She's threatening the future of this company." "The only threat to this company is sitting at the head of this table," Imani replied calmly. "Your father built Barnes Technologies on innovation and respect for talent. You've nearly destroyed it through entitlement and prejudice." The boardroom fell silent as the truth of her words resonated. Everyone present had witnessed Maxwell's decline into paranoid leadership, his growing resentment of Imani's brilliance, his desperate attempts to claim credit for her innovations. "I've prepared 2 options for the board's consideration," Imani continued, sliding tablets across the conference table. "Option 1 is my resignation, effective immediately, with all licensing agreements converted to non-exclusive status. Barnes Technologies would retain implementation rights, but so would your competitors. Additionally, I'd be free to bring my newest designs, including quantum architecture, to market elsewhere." Maxwell's hands trembled as he read the document. "This would destroy us." "Option 2, Imani continued without acknowledging his interruption, "is a restructuring of executive leadership. I would assume the position of Chief Technology Officer with full autonomy over R&D, product development, and technical strategy. My compensation would be adjusted to reflect market rates for executives generating comparable revenue, and the company would implement comprehensive diversity initiatives with quantifiable metrics tied to executive compensation." The board members studied both options in stunned silence, the magnitude of Imani's leverage becoming painfully clear. She controlled the intellectual property that powered everything from their smartphones to their autonomous vehicles, from their cloud security to their artificial intelligence systems. "This is a hostile takeover," Maxwell whispered, his voice hollow with the realization that he'd catastrophically miscalculated. "This is a correction," Imani replied. "For 8 years, I've given this company revolutionary technology while accepting less than I deserve in compensation, recognition, and respect. That ends today." Thomas Jenkins cleared his throat again. "I move that we convene an emergency executive session to review Dr. Wright's proposals. Maxwell, I believe it would be appropriate for you to recuse yourself from this discussion given the obvious conflict of interest." "You can't remove me from a board meeting at my own company," Maxwell shouted, desperation cracking his voice. "Actually, according to corporate bylaws, Section 7(2), the board can vote to temporarily exclude any member with a direct conflict of interest," said Elaine Davidson, general counsel who had remained silent until now. "Given that Dr. Wright's complaint directly names you, your presence could compromise the legal integrity of our deliberations." Maxwell stood up, knocking over his chair. "This is collusion. You're all afraid of her because she has you convinced the company would collapse without her. No one is irreplaceable." "That's where you're wrong," Thomas replied quietly. "Some people truly are irreplaceable. Your father understood that. That's why he protected Dr. Wright with that contract, because he recognized her extraordinary value, while you've spent years trying to diminish it." Imani remained perfectly composed as Maxwell stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to crack the glass panel. She had spent her entire career being underestimated, dismissed, and marginalized. She had watched less qualified men take credit for her work, receive promotions she deserved, and earn salaries far exceeding her own, despite generating a fraction of her value. But Imani Wright had played the long game. She'd documented every instance of discrimination. She'd structured her employment agreement to maintain control of her intellectual property. She'd built relationships with board members who recognized her value. And she'd created technology so revolutionary that the company literally couldn't function without her. "Dr. Wright," Thomas said once Maxwell had left, "the board would like to sincerely apologize for this situation. We've failed in our oversight responsibilities by allowing this environment to persist." Imani nodded slightly, acknowledging but not absolving them. "I appreciate that recognition, but systematic change requires more than apologies. It requires restructuring power dynamics that enable discrimination to flourish unchecked." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, confronted with their own complicity. They had witnessed Maxwell's behavior for years, but prioritized profits and stability over addressing the toxic culture he created. "We'd like to review your second option in detail," Thomas continued, "the restructuring proposal. If you're amenable, we can begin discussions immediately." Imani opened her laptop, revealing the comprehensive plan she'd spent months developing. It wasn't just about her position or compensation. It addressed systematic barriers affecting every marginalized person at Barnes Technologies. "My proposal includes several components beyond my personal situation," she explained. "Anonymous pay equity audits across all departments, blind resume screening to eliminate bias in hiring, mentorship programs for underrepresented employees, measurable diversity goals tied to executive compensation, and whistleblower protections for employees reporting discrimination." The board members nodded, some reluctantly, others with genuine interest. They recognized that Imani's demands weren't just about personal gain. They were about transforming the company culture that had enabled Maxwell's behavior. "Before we proceed further," Imani said, "I need to be absolutely clear about something. This isn't a negotiation where you can accept some terms and reject others. This is a comprehensive package that addresses systematic problems requiring systematic solutions." Thomas looked around at his fellow board members, sensing their hesitation. "Dr. Wright, while we appreciate your position, some of these changes represent significant departures from established practices. Perhaps we could implement them gradually over several years?" Imani closed her laptop with deliberate precision. "Gentlemen and Ms. Davidson, I've been extraordinarily patient for 8 years. I've watched this company build billion-dollar product lines on my innovations while systematically undervaluing my contributions. I've endured Maxwell's public humiliation while creating technology that transformed this industry. There will be no gradual implementation. She stood up, gathering her materials with calm determination. You have 24 hours to accept my proposal in its entirety, or I exercise option 1. My resignation, non-exclusive licensing, and the freedom to bring my newest designs to your competitors. I believe Google and Apple have already expressed interest. The mention of their largest competitors sent a visible shudder through the boardroom. Imani Wright walking into Google headquarters with her quantum computing architecture would be an extinction-level event for Barnes Technologies. 24 hours seems unnecessarily rushed for decisions of this magnitude, protested Richard Thompson, head of global operations. I've given this company 8 years of patience, Imani replied. Maxwell Barnes gave me 90 seconds to accept a humiliating demotion. 24 hours is generous by comparison. As she walked toward the door, Thomas called after her. Dr. Wright, surely we can find a reasonable middle ground that addresses your concerns while maintaining operational stability. Imani paused, turning back to face the board. For years, I was told to be reasonable, to be patient, to wait my turn, to accept less than I deserved, because that's how the system works. Today I'm showing you how the system actually works when intellectual property meets institutional discrimination. Power recognizes power, gentlemen. You have 24 hours. The door closed behind her with quiet precision, leaving the board members in stunned silence. They had just witnessed the perfect convergence of brilliance, preparation, and justified retribution. Imani Wright hadn't just outmaneuvered Maxwell Barnes, she had exposed the entire system that had protected him while exploiting her. As Imani walked through the executive floor for what might be the last time, employees watched with curious eyes. They had heard Maxwell's shouting through the supposedly soundproof boardroom. They had seen him storm out in uncontrolled rage. And now they watched Imani Wright, the quiet genius behind their company's most revolutionary products, walk with dignified purpose toward an uncertain future. In her office, Imani closed the door and finally allowed herself a moment of genuine emotion. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured a glass of water, the weight of the confrontation catching up with her carefully maintained composure. For 8 years, she had endured systematic marginalization while creating technology that transformed modern computing. She had watched Maxwell take credit for her innovations during press conferences, introduce her as our diversity hire to important clients, and promote less qualified men based on leadership potential while relegating her to technical work. She had documented everything, every dismissive comment, every instance of pay inequity, every time her ideas were ignored until a white male colleague repeated them, every project she'd rescued after others had failed, every patent that generated millions while she received standard bonuses. Her phone buzzed with a text from her attorney, Jordan Martinez. How did it go? Imani typed back, exactly as predicted. They have 24 hours to accept full restructuring, or I walk with non-exclusive licensing rights. Maxwell completely lost control. Jordan's response came quickly, already receiving calls from board members, attorneys. They're rattled. Stand firm. Everything we've prepared for is happening. Imani smiled slightly. She had assembled an exceptional team, attorneys specializing in intellectual property and employment discrimination, financial analysts who had calculated the exact value of her contributions to Barnes Technologies, and former executives who understood the corporate politics that had enabled Maxwell's behavior. Her preparation hadn't been about revenge. It had been about justice. Not just for herself, but for every person who had been systematically undervalued because of who they were, rather than what they contributed. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Elaine Davidson, the company's general counsel, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Dr. Wright, may I speak with you privately? Imani gestured for her to enter, maintaining professional courtesy despite the adversarial situation. As the only woman on the executive team besides herself, Elaine had occasionally been an ally, though always within the constraints of her position. The board is in complete disarray, Elaine said once the door was closed. Half want to accept your terms immediately. The other half are terrified of the precedent it would set. The precedent of paying people what they're worth regardless of their race or gender? Imani asked with pointed precision, Elaine winced slightly. From their perspective, it's about maintaining established corporate hierarchies and compensation structures. Those established structures were designed to benefit certain people at the expense of others, Imani replied calmly. My proposal simply corrects a systematic imbalance between value creation and value capture. Elaine nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm advocating for your proposal, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's genuinely in the company's best interest. Losing you would be catastrophic. I appreciate that, Elaine, but this isn't about individual advocacy. It's about institutional transformation. The problem isn't just Maxwell. It's the system that empowered him while constraining me. The board wants to know if you'd consider extending the deadline, Elaine said. They're arguing that 24 hours isn't enough time for due diligence on such significant changes. Imani's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried unmistakable resolve. They've had 8 years to perform due diligence on the systematic discrimination at this company. Maxwell had no problem giving me 90 seconds to accept a humiliating demotion. The deadline stands. As Elaine left, Imani returned to her computer and continued the work that had made her indispensable. On her screen were preliminary designs for quantum computing architecture that would transform the industry again, technology that competitors would pay billions to access. Barnes Technologies had 2 paths forward: embrace transformation under her leadership, or face extinction without her innovations. Either way, Imani Wright would never again accept less than she deserved. The next 24 hours would determine not just her future, but the future of an entire company built on her genius. And the system that had tried to contain it was about to learn an expensive lesson about the true cost of discrimination. Imani Wright walked into her basement office on Monday morning, the demotion implemented with cruel efficiency over the weekend. Her spacious corner office with panoramic views of Seattle had been reassigned to Bradley Cooper, a mediocre engineer who'd once taken credit for her machine learning algorithm. Her name had been removed from the executive leadership page on the company website. Her team had been dispersed across different departments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The basement lab smelled of mildew and forgotten ambition. A single window at ground level offered a view of the parking lot, rain splashing against concrete in perfect metaphor for her current situation. Her desk, a scratched metal table salvaged from surplus, held a computer with processing power deliberately insufficient for the advanced modeling her work required. This was Maxwell Barnes' idea of punishment. 8 years of revolutionary innovation reduced to a windowless basement and obsolete equipment. The message was clear: know your place. Imani set down her bag and surveyed what would either be her prison for the coming months or her last day at Barnes Technologies. The 24-hour deadline she'd given the board would expire at 2 p.m. Until then, she would do what she'd always done: brilliant work despite systematic obstacles. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jordan Martinez. Board still deliberating. Internal sources say it's split 50-50. Stay strong. Imani replied with a thumbs-up emoji, her composure maintained even in private messages. She had prepared for this moment for years, documenting every instance of discrimination, structuring her contract to maintain control of her intellectual property, building relationships with board members who recognized her value. She turned on her computer and began working on quantum architecture simulations that would run at approximately 1/100th the speed they would have on her executive-level equipment. Maxwell's petty downgrade wouldn't stop her work. It would merely make it take longer. She had always faced artificial barriers. This was just one more. 2 floors above, the board of directors had reconvened an emergency session. The atmosphere was tense. Executives divided between those who recognized the existential threat of losing Imani Wright and those who couldn't stomach the precedent of yielding to an employee's demands, especially a black woman's demands. This is corporate extortion, insisted Richard Thompson, head of global operations. If we give in to Wright's ultimatum, every employee with a patent will try the same strategy. Every employee doesn't have 147 patents generating 86% of our revenue, Thomas Jenkins replied dryly. This isn't about setting precedent, it's about recognizing reality. Without Dr. Wright's innovations, we don't have a company. We own those patents, Richard argued, revealing the same fundamental misunderstanding as Maxwell. Elaine Davidson, general counsel, cleared her throat. Actually, we don't. I've reviewed Dr. Wright's employment agreement extensively. Robert Barnes specifically structured her contract to grant us exclusive implementation rights contingent upon her continued leadership position and equitable compensation. If we violate those terms, the licensing converts to non-exclusive status. That's insane, Richard protested. Why would Robert agree to that? Because he recognized her exceptional value, Thomas said quietly. Robert always said Imani Wright was the future of this company. He structured her agreement to ensure she'd stay and continue innovating. He knew what Maxwell seems determined to ignore, that some people truly are irreplaceable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. So we just surrender control of our company to an employee? Asked Margaret Wilson, recently appointed to the board and unfamiliar with Imani's contributions. Dr. Wright isn't asking for control of the company, Elaine corrected. She's asking for appropriate recognition of her contributions, fair compensation for the value she creates, and systematic reforms to prevent discrimination. She's asking for what she deserves. The boardroom fell silent as executives confronted their options. Accept Imani's terms and transform the company culture, or reject them and watch her walk to a competitor with the intellectual property that powered their entire product line. Meanwhile, 3 floors below the boardroom, Maxwell Barnes stormed into Imani's basement office without knocking. His face was flushed with rage, his expensive suit wrinkled from a sleepless night contemplating the destruction of his family legacy. "You think you're going to win this, don't you?" he spat, looming over her desk in a final attempt at intimidation. Imani didn't look up from her computer. "This isn't about winning, Mr. Barnes. It's about correction. For 8 years, I've given this company revolutionary technology while accepting less than I deserve in compensation, recognition, and respect. You've been compensated extremely well," Maxwell protested. "Your salary is in the top quartile for your position." Now Imani looked up, her gaze steady and unflinching. "My position as determined by you, not by my contributions. Last year I generated $2.7 billion in revenue for Barnes Technologies. You paid me $225,000. That's less than 1/100% of the value I created." "That's how corporations work," Maxwell sneered. "Employees don't get paid based on revenue generation." "Actually, they often do," Imani replied calmly. "Your sales executives receive commission percentages. Your C-suite receives performance bonuses tied to revenue. Your own compensation package includes stock options that increase in value specifically because of patents I've developed. The variable compensation structures exist, they just haven't been applied to me." Maxwell's hands clenched at his sides, unused to being challenged with precise logic and irrefutable facts. "The board will never accept your demands. It would completely restructure our executive hierarchy and compensation systems." "Yes," Imani agreed simply. "That's the point. The current structures were designed to benefit certain people at the expense of others. My proposal corrects that imbalance." "You're just doing this because you're angry about the demotion," Maxwell accused, searching for any motivation he could understand. Personal grievance made sense to him. Systematic justice did not. "I'm doing this because it's necessary," Imani corrected him. "For me, for every other marginalized person at this company, and for Barnes Technologies itself. A company that systematically undervalues its most innovative talent isn't sustainable." Maxwell leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I will destroy your career before I let you dictate terms to my company. I have connections throughout this industry. No one will hire you after I'm finished." Imani's expression remained unchanged, her voice maintaining its measured calm. "Mr. Barnes, you seem to be operating under several fundamental misconceptions. First, this isn't your company. It's a publicly traded corporation with fiduciary obligations to shareholders. Second, my career isn't dependent on your approval. It's built on 147 patents that have transformed modern computing. And third, your threats constitute workplace harassment that I'm recording for my attorneys." She turned her computer monitor slightly, revealing video capture software documenting their entire conversation. Maxwell recoiled as if physically struck. "That's illegal," he sputtered. Washington is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, Imani replied. As my attorneys have thoroughly briefed me, your threats of professional retaliation will make excellent evidence in the discrimination lawsuit I'll file if the board rejects my proposal. Maxwell's face contorted with impotent rage. You planned all of this. I prepared for it, Imani corrected. There's a difference. I would have preferred a company culture that valued my contributions appropriately from the beginning. Since that didn't exist, I created contingency plans to protect myself. Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The board was calling him back to the emergency session. Without another word, he stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the basement walls. Imani returned to her work with the same focus that had produced revolutionary technology despite years of systematic obstacles. She wasn't motivated by revenge. She was motivated by justice. Not just for herself, but for every person who had been undervalued because of who they were, rather than what they contributed. Upstairs, the board meeting had reached a critical juncture. Financial analysts had completed modeling the impact of losing Imani's patents to competitors. The projections were catastrophic. Stock price dropping 78%, revenue declining 62%, and bankruptcy likely within 18 months. The numbers are unambiguous, concluded James Wilson, chief financial officer. If Dr. Wright walks and takes her patents to competitors, Barnes Technologies will not survive. So we're being held hostage by a single employee, Richard Thompson protested. We're experiencing the consequences of systematically undervaluing our most important asset, Thomas Jenkins corrected. This isn't extortion, it's market correction. Dr. Wright is simply demanding appropriate compensation for the value she creates. Maxwell burst into the boardroom, his face still flushed from his confrontation with Imani. We cannot allow an employee to dictate terms to this company. It violates every principle of corporate governance. Elaine Davidson looked up from her legal documents with practiced patience. Maxwell, corporate governance also includes fiduciary duty to shareholders. The financial analysis makes it clear that rejecting Dr. Wright's proposal would constitute a breach of that duty. The board would be knowingly taking action that destroys shareholder value. This is about more than money, Maxwell insisted, revealing the true motivation behind his opposition. This is about who controls Barnes Technologies. Exactly, Thomas replied quietly, and the reality is that intellectual property controls this company. Dr. Wright created that intellectual property. She structured her employment agreement to maintain control of licensing. Those are simply facts we must accept. The boardroom fell silent as executives absorbed this fundamental truth. For years, they had operated under the illusion that Barnes Technologies controlled Imani Wright. The reality was precisely the opposite. Her innovations were the company. Without them, Barnes Technologies was just another failing electronics manufacturer with outdated products and diminishing market share. We need to vote, Thomas finally said, checking his watch. Dr. Wright's deadline expires in 3 hours. We either accept her proposal in its entirety or face the consequences of her resignation. In her basement office, Imani received another text from Jordan Martinez. Board still deliberating. Maxwell fighting hard against you. Financial analysis supports your position completely. Stay strong. Imani continued working on quantum computing simulations, her focus unbroken despite the corporate drama unfolding above her. She had done everything possible to prepare for this moment. Now the outcome rested with executives who had to choose between their comfortable prejudices and their financial survival. At 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before her deadline expired, Imani's phone rang with a call from Thomas Jenkins. Dr. Wright, the board has reached a decision. We'd like you to join us in the main conference room. Imani saved her work and gathered her materials with deliberate calm. This would either be her moment of vindication or her last hour at Barnes Technologies. Either way, she would face it with the same dignity and precision that had characterized her entire career. As she rode the elevator to the executive floor, access hastily restored by security, she reflected on the 8 years she'd given this company. The countless late nights developing breakthrough technology, the meetings where her ideas were dismissed until repeated by white male colleagues, the promotions given to less qualified men while she was told to focus on technical work. The conference room fell silent as she entered, executives watching with expressions ranging from resentment to respect. Maxwell sat at the far end, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. Thomas Jenkins stood at the head of the table, official documents spread before him. "Dr. Wright," Thomas began, his voice carrying the formal tone of official board business. "After extensive deliberation, the board has voted to accept your proposal in its entirety." A ripple of reaction moved through the room, relief from some, resignation from others. Maxwell's face flushed crimson, but he remained silent, outvoted and outmaneuvered. "Effective immediately, you are appointed Chief Technology Officer with full autonomy over R&D, product development, and technical strategy," Thomas continued. "Your compensation has been adjusted to reflect the value you create for this company, including substantial equity grants and performance-based incentives." Imani nodded slightly, her expression revealing nothing of the vindication she felt. This wasn't about personal triumph. It was about systematic correction. Additionally, the board has approved implementation of comprehensive diversity initiatives, as outlined in your proposal, Thomas added. Anonymous pay equity audits, blind resume screening, mentorship programs for underrepresented employees, measurable diversity goals tied to executive compensation, and whistleblower protections for employees reporting discrimination. "And Mr. Barnes?" Imani asked, her gaze shifting to Maxwell's furious form at the end of the table. Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Barnes has been removed as CEO, effective immediately. The board has determined that his leadership decisions constitute material risk to shareholder value. He will transition to a non-executive chairman role with significantly reduced authority." Maxwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping across hardwood. "This is not over," he snarled before storming out of the conference room for the second time in 24 hours. The remaining executives shifted awkwardly, caught between recognition of necessary change and discomfort with the power dynamics that had been so dramatically reversed. "Dr. Wright," Thomas continued once Maxwell had left, "the board would like to express its sincere apology for the environment you've endured and its commitment to implementing the changes you've outlined. We recognize that this transformation is long overdue." Imani assessed the executives before her with the same analytical precision she applied to complex engineering problems. Some were genuinely committed to change, others were merely yielding to financial necessity. All would require monitoring to ensure compliance with the new directives. "Apologies are meaningful only when coupled with corrective action," she replied. "I accept your commitment to transformation and look forward to building a company that values all contributors appropriately." The meeting concluded with signatures on official documents, formalities that transformed Barnes Technology's executive structure, compensation systems, and corporate culture. Imani's 8 years of strategic patience, meticulous documentation, and revolutionary innovation had culminated in systematic change that would benefit not just her, but every undervalued employee. As executives filed out, Thomas remained behind. "For what it's worth, I believe Robert would be proud of what happened today," he said quietly. "He always said you were the future of this company. He just didn't realize how literally that would become true." Imani allowed herself a small smile. Robert Barnes recognized value regardless of its packaging. His son never learned that lesson. "The company announcement goes out in an hour," Thomas continued. "Your appointment as CTO, the diversity initiatives, Maxwell's transition. It's going to cause quite a stir in the industry." "Change always does," Imani replied simply. Later that afternoon, Imani Wright stood in her new office, the same one previously occupied by Maxwell Barnes. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Seattle, rain giving way to unexpected sunshine that cast the city in golden light. Her phone buzzed continuously with congratulatory messages from colleagues who had witnessed her struggle and supported her quietly over the years. Her email filled with interview requests from technology publications eager to profile the new CTO whose patents controlled industry standards. But Imani's focus remained on the work that had always been her primary motivation. On her computer screen were the quantum computing simulations that would transform the industry again. Technology that would now be developed under her leadership, with appropriate recognition and compensation. The Barnes technology she had joined 8 years ago had systematically undervalued her contributions while profiting enormously from her innovations. The Barnes technologies she now helped lead would be fundamentally different, a company where excellence was recognized regardless of packaging, where compensation reflected value creation, and where systematic barriers to advancement had been identified and dismantled. As she looked out over the city she'd called home for 8 years, Imani reflected on the lesson her transformation of Barnes Technologies offered to every undervalued person fighting for recognition. Preparation meets opportunity, meets justice. Her strategic patience, meticulous documentation, and revolutionary innovation had created leverage that even entrenched power couldn't ignore. The system hadn't changed out of moral awakening. It had changed because she'd made the cost of discrimination too expensive to maintain. And in that economic reality lay a powerful truth about institutional transformation. Sometimes justice comes not through appeals to conscience but through appeals to the bottom line. Imani Wright had changed Barnes Technologies forever. And in doing so, she had created a blueprint for systematic change that would reverberate throughout the technology industry and beyond. 3 months into her role as Chief Technology Officer, Imani Wright stood before 500 Barnes Technologies employees in the company's largest auditorium. The quarterly all-hands meeting had once been Maxwell's opportunity to take credit for innovations he hadn't created. Today, it was Imani's platform to unveil the future she had engineered, both technologically and culturally. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When I joined Barnes Technologies 8 years ago, Imani began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium. I was told to focus on technical work and leave leadership to others. Today, I want to talk about the inextricable connection between innovation and inclusion, and how Barnes Technologies is being transformed by embracing both. The audience watched with rapt attention. Employees who had witnessed her basement demotion and boardroom triumph now saw Imani Wright as a symbol of what was possible when brilliance refused to be diminished. Our first quarter under new leadership has exceeded all projections, she continued, slides appearing behind her showing remarkable financial results. Revenue up 23%. Stock price increased 41%. Research productivity improved 37%. And most importantly, employee satisfaction scores have risen across all demographics. The numbers told a powerful story. Barnes Technologies wasn't just surviving its dramatic transformation, it was thriving precisely because of it. These results aren't accidental, Imani explained. They're the direct consequence of recognizing and rewarding excellence regardless of its packaging. When people feel valued for their contributions, they contribute more value. In the third row, Thomas Jenkins watched with quiet satisfaction. As interim CEO following Maxwell's removal, he had supported Imani's initiatives with genuine commitment, recognizing that they represented not just moral necessity, but business wisdom. Today I'm excited to announce 3 developments that will define Barnes Technologies' future. Imani continued. First, our quantum computing architecture has passed final simulation testing. This technology will transform everything from medical research to financial modeling, and Barnes Technologies controls the fundamental patents. Applause rippled through the auditorium. The quantum architecture had been ridiculed as fantasy under Maxwell's leadership. Under Imani's direction, it had progressed from theoretical possibility to commercial reality in just 3 months. Second, we're implementing a company-wide innovation incentive program that directly ties compensation to intellectual property development. When your ideas generate revenue for Barnes Technologies, you will receive appropriate financial recognition, regardless of your title or department. This announcement drew even stronger applause. For years, Barnes Technologies had operated like most corporations. Executives received massive compensation packages, while frontline innovators received modest salaries despite creating the value that drove the business. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And finally, Imani said, her voice taking on additional gravity, I'm proud to announce the Barnes Innovation Fellowship. Each year we will select 10 promising engineers from underrepresented backgrounds for a fully funded advanced degree program combined with mentorship from our senior technical staff. These fellows will receive competitive salaries while pursuing their education, with guaranteed positions at Barnes Technologies upon graduation. The auditorium erupted in enthusiastic applause. Employees recognized the program for what it was, a systematic approach to addressing the pipeline problems that companies often cited as excuse for lack of diversity. These initiatives reflect our core belief, Imani concluded. that excellence deserves recognition regardless of its source, that innovation flourishes in environments where all contributors are valued, and that Barnes Technology's future depends on embracing talent in all its forms. As the applause continued, Imani scanned the audience, noting the diversity that had already begun to increase in the 3 months since her appointment. New hiring practices had brought in talented engineers from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in tech. Promotion policies had elevated deserving employees who had previously been overlooked. When the presentation concluded, Imani made her way through crowds of employees eager to share ideas that had been suppressed under previous leadership. The cultural transformation was palpable. People who had kept their heads down for years now felt empowered to contribute their full creativity. "Dr. Wright?" called a voice from behind her. Imani turned to find Rebecca Chen, a brilliant engineer who had nearly left the company after being passed over for promotion 3 times despite extraordinary contributions. "I just wanted to thank you. The patent I submitted last month was approved by the review committee, and I received notification about the incentive compensation this morning. It's more than my annual salary." Imani smiled warmly. "That's exactly how the program is designed to work, Rebecca. Your innovation is projected to generate $40 million in revenue next year. You should be compensated accordingly. Under the old system, I would have received a standard bonus and watched executives get rich from my work," Rebecca said, her voice tinged with lingering disbelief at the transformation. "That system was designed to extract maximum value from innovators while transferring rewards to people who didn't create the value," Imani replied. "Our new approach simply corrects that imbalance." As Rebecca walked away, visibly energized by the recognition of her contributions, Thomas Jenkins approached with the day's market report. "Stock hit another all-time high," he said, handing Imani the tablet displaying Barnes Technology's remarkable financial trajectory since her appointment as CTO. "The market recognizes value when it sees it," Imani replied. "How are the institutional investors responding to the changes?" "They're ecstatic," Thomas admitted. "The same board members who initially resisted your proposals are now taking credit for the transformation. Amazing how quickly principles give way to profits." Imani smiled slightly. "I never expected moral awakening, Thomas. I expected economic rationality. When discrimination becomes expensive enough, systems change regardless of underlying beliefs." As they walked toward the executive offices, Thomas lowered his voice. "Maxwell's attorneys have requested another meeting. They're still pushing for his reinstatement as CEO." "On what grounds?" Imani asked, though she already knew the answer. "The same tired arguments. That your appointment was made under duress. That the board breached fiduciary duty by removing him. That the entire restructuring represents a hostile takeover by an employee." Imani shook her head slightly. His persistent failure to understand the actual power dynamics is almost impressive. "I didn't take over Barnes Technologies. I simply stopped allowing it to profit from my innovations without appropriate recognition and compensation." "The legal team says his case has no merit," Thomas assured her. "Your employment agreement was meticulously structured, and the board's decision is protected by business judgment rule. But Maxwell seems determined to fight regardless of legal reality." "That's consistent with his character," Imani replied. "He spent years ignoring the reality of who actually created value at this company. Why would he suddenly embrace reality now?" In her office, the same one previously occupied by Maxwell, Imani reviewed the quarterly financial reports with satisfaction. Barnes Technologies had not only survived its transformation but was thriving precisely because of it. Revenue was up, stock price was soaring, employee productivity and satisfaction had reached record levels. Most importantly, the culture had fundamentally changed. Engineers who had previously minimized their contributions for fear of threatening fragile egos now brought their full creativity to bear. Employees from underrepresented backgrounds who had kept their heads down now stepped forward with breakthrough innovations. The company had tapped into a wellspring of talent that had always existed but had been systematically suppressed. A knock at her door interrupted her review. Elaine Davidson, General Counsel, entered with an expression that combined professional neutrality with suppressed excitement. "The Williams merger team just called," Elaine announced. "They've increased their offer by 30%, based on our quarterly results and the quantum computing announcement. It would be the largest acquisition in tech history. Imani considered this development with the strategic precision that characterized her leadership. The Williams merger had been Maxwell's obsession, a transaction that would have cemented his legacy while allowing Williams Enterprises to acquire Barnes Technologies, revolutionary patents. What would the executive structure look like post-merger? Imani asked, cutting directly to the core issue. That's the interesting part, Elaine replied. They want you as Chief Innovation Officer for the combined entity, with complete autonomy over R&D across all divisions. They're essentially building the merger around your continued leadership of technological development. Imani nodded thoughtfully. And the diversity initiatives we've implemented? The Innovation Incentive Program? The Fellowship? All preserved and expanded, Elaine confirmed. Williams has actually requested our complete diversity and inclusion framework as a condition of closing. They want to implement it across their entire organization. This represented the ultimate validation of Imani's approach. Not only had Barnes Technologies transformed under her leadership, but now an industry giant wanted to adopt her innovations, both technological and cultural, throughout their global operations. Schedule a board meeting for tomorrow, Imani decided. I'll need to review the complete terms before making a recommendation, but this could represent an extraordinary opportunity to scale our impact. After Elaine left, Imani stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle, reflecting on how dramatically circumstances had changed in just 3 months. The woman Maxwell had demoted to a basement office with obsolete equipment, now controlled whether his family's company would be acquired in the largest tech merger in history. But Imani's satisfaction came not from personal vindication, but from systematic transformation. Barnes Technologies had become a model for the industry, proving that recognizing and rewarding excellence, regardless of its packaging, wasn't just morally right, but financially optimal. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jordan Martinez. You've seen the Williams offer? Phenomenal validation of everything we've built. Your journey from basement to boardroom is becoming legend in tech circles. Imani smiled slightly at her attorney's characteristic enthusiasm. The journey isn't nearly as important as the destination, she replied. And we're just getting started. The next morning, Imani arrived early to prepare for the board meeting that would determine Barnes Technologies' future. As she reviewed the Williams acquisition proposal, her assistant notified her of an unexpected visitor. Maxwell Barnes is in reception. Her assistant reported with evident discomfort. He's demanding to see you before the board meeting. Security is standing by. Imani considered her options. She could refuse the meeting, having no obligation to engage with the former CEO whose discrimination had nearly destroyed the company. Or she could grant him an audience, demonstrating the confidence of someone who had nothing to fear from previous oppressors. Send him in, she decided, but stay on intercom. If you hear anything concerning, alert security immediately. Maxwell Barnes entered her office with none of his previous bluster. 3 months of legal defeats and public humiliation had taken visible toll. His once immaculate appearance had given way to subtle dishevelment, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled, his tie slightly askew. Dr. Wright, he began, the formal address itself representing dramatic departure from his previous dismissive approach. I understand the board is meeting today to consider the Williams acquisition offer. The board is meeting to consider several strategic opportunities, Imani replied neutrally, revealing nothing. Maxwell nodded, uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features. I've come to make a proposal of my own, one that would benefit all parties involved. Imani gestured to the visitor's chair, maintaining professional courtesy despite their history. I'm listening. I want to return to Barnes Technologies, Maxwell said bluntly. Not as CEO. I recognize that ship has sailed. But as head of business development, focusing on what I do best while leaving the technical innovation to you. Imani studied him carefully, looking for signs of the entitlement and prejudice that had characterized their previous interactions. What she saw instead was something unexpected, desperation masked by forced humility. That's an interesting proposal, she replied neutrally. May I ask what prompted this change in perspective? Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. 3 months of watching from the sidelines as the company my father built achieves heights I never reached as CEO. 3 months of lawyers explaining that my legal position is hopeless. 3 months of industry colleagues suddenly too busy to return my calls. So your motivation is primarily self-interest, Imani observed, neither judging nor accepting. Isn't everyone's? Maxwell countered. You transformed Barnes Technologies because it served your interests to receive appropriate recognition and compensation. I want to return because being ostracized from the company my father built is unbearable. Imani considered his perspective with analytical precision. There's a fundamental difference in our motivations, Mr. Barnes. My transformation of this company benefited not just me, but every employee whose contributions had been systematically undervalued. Your return would benefit primarily yourself. I could contribute value, Maxwell insisted. I have relationships throughout the industry. I understand the business side in ways you don't. Those relationships didn't prevent our stock price from declining 23% in your final year as CEO, Imani replied calmly. And the business side has flourished under new leadership precisely because we've aligned incentives with value creation. Maxwell's facade of humility cracked slightly, frustration leaking through. So that's it? No possibility of redemption? No chance to be part of my family's legacy? Imani leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. Redemption requires more than self-interest disguised as contrition, Mr. Barnes. It requires genuine recognition of harm caused and commitment to fundamental change. What would that look like? Maxwell asked. Genuine curiosity mingling with lingering resentment. It would start with acknowledging that your leadership was characterized by systematic discrimination that harmed both individuals and the company itself. Imani replied directly. It would continue with concrete actions demonstrating your commitment to transformation, perhaps beginning with the fellowship program for underrepresented engineers. Maxwell's expression revealed the internal struggle between his desire to return and his resistance to admitting fundamental failure. And if I took those steps, if I demonstrated genuine change, then we could discuss appropriate roles where your skills might benefit the company without undermining the cultural transformation we've achieved, Imani said. But that process would take time and consistent evidence of change, not a single conversation before a critical board meeting. As Maxwell left, visibly unsatisfied with her response but lacking leverage to demand more, Imani reflected on the cyclical nature of power. The man who had once demoted her to a basement office now sought her permission to return to the company his family had founded. The woman he had dismissed as just a diversity hire now controlled his professional future. But Imani's decisions were never about personal revenge. They were about systematic justice, creating environments where excellence was recognized regardless of its packaging. Maxwell Barnes might eventually earn a place in the transformed company, but only by demonstrating the same commitment to inclusive excellence that he had previously ridiculed. The board meeting that afternoon was brief and decisive. The Williams acquisition offer represented extraordinary opportunity to scale both technological innovations and cultural transformations across a global enterprise. With Imani as Chief Innovation Officer of the combined entity, her vision would expand from a single company to an industry giant with influence throughout the technology ecosystem. The vote is unanimous, Thomas announced after brief deliberation. We will proceed with the Williams acquisition under the terms negotiated, with Dr. Wright leading innovation across the combined organization. As board members congratulated each other on the landmark transaction, Barnes Technologies stock had jumped 17% on acquisition rumors. Imani's thoughts were already focused on the expanded impact she could create. The transformation she had engineered at Barnes Technologies would now be implemented across Williams' global operations, affecting tens of thousands of employees and countless innovative minds, previously constrained by systematic barriers. The technology industry that had systematically marginalized brilliance in diverse packaging was about to experience disruption more profound than any product innovation. By proving that inclusive excellence wasn't just morally right but financially optimal, Imani Wright had created a blueprint for transformation that would reverberate throughout corporate America and beyond. The basement office where Maxwell had attempted to contain her brilliance was now a distant memory. The future belonged to those who recognize that excellence deserves recognition regardless of its source, and the companies smart enough to embrace that truth would inherit the next generation of innovation. 5 years after the Williams-Barnes merger, Imani Wright stood on the Tech Future Summit main stage in San Francisco, the most prestigious gathering of technology leaders in the world. As Chief Innovation Officer of the combined entity, now simply called Wright Technologies after a rebranding that acknowledged the true source of its value, she had transformed not just a company but an entire industry. Before we jump back in, Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 5 years ago, Imani began, her voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. I was demoted to a basement office for challenging the status quo. Today, I want to talk about what happens when we recognize that innovation comes in all forms and excellence deserves recognition regardless of its packaging. The audience, 3,000 technology leaders from companies that had once dismissed diverse talent, listened with rapt attention. Imani Wright had become more than an executive. She had become a symbol of what was possible when brilliance refused to be diminished. Wright Technologies has outperformed every market projection for 5 consecutive years, she continued, slides appearing behind her showing remarkable financial results. Revenue growth 347% above industry average. Market capitalization increased 189%. Patent applications up 573%. And employee satisfaction scores that lead the industry across all demographics. The numbers told an undeniable story. Wright Technologies wasn't just the most innovative company in the sector. It was the most profitable precisely because of its revolutionary approach to valuing diverse talent. These results weren't achieved through traditional corporate strategies, Imani explained. They came from a fundamental reimagining of how we identify, develop, and reward excellence. When we removed artificial barriers to advancement, we unlocked extraordinary potential that had always existed, but had been systematically suppressed. In the front row, William Williams, founder of Williams Enterprises and now chairman of Wright Technologies, nodded in agreement. Unlike Maxwell Barnes, he had recognized the transformative potential of Imani's approach from the beginning, implementing her innovations throughout the combined organization. Today, I'm excited to announce 3 initiatives that will define the next chapter of technological innovation, Imani continued. First, our quantum neural interface has completed clinical trials with unprecedented success. This technology will transform everything from medical treatment to educational access. And Wright Technologies will make the basic patents available through open licensing to ensure maximum benefit to humanity. Applause rippled through the auditorium. The quantum neural interface represented the most significant technological breakthrough since the Internet, technology that could potentially restore movement to paralyzed patients, accelerate learning for students with disabilities, and create entirely new forms of human-computer interaction. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Second, we're expanding our Innovation Fellows program from 100 to 1,000 positions annually, providing fully funded advanced degrees and guaranteed employment to promising engineers from underrepresented backgrounds, Imani announced. The first cohort of fellows has produced technological innovations valued at over $4 billion, proving definitively that talent exists in all communities when given equitable opportunity. This announcement drew even stronger applause. The fellowship program that had begun at Barnes Technologies had expanded dramatically under Wright Technologies, creating a pipeline of diverse talent that had transformed the company's innovation capacity. And finally, Imani said, her voice taking on additional gravity, I'm proud to announce the Wright Innovation Foundation, with initial funding of $10 billion, dedicated to identifying and developing technological talent in communities systematically excluded from traditional opportunity structures. This foundation will build innovation centers in 50 underserved communities globally, providing access to cutting-edge technology, mentorship from industry leaders, and direct pathways to educational and professional advancement. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. The foundation represented the most significant private investment in technological equity in history, a commitment to ensuring that the next generation of innovation would draw from humanity's full creative potential rather than the artificially limited pool that had characterized previous eras. These initiatives reflect our core belief, Imani concluded once the applause subsided, that excellence exists everywhere but opportunity does not. That diversity drives innovation precisely because different perspectives generate different solutions, and that the future of technology depends on embracing talent in all its forms. As she left the stage to continued applause, Imani reflected on the extraordinary journey from basement demotion to industry transformation. The woman Maxwell Barnes had tried to contain with obsolete equipment and limited authority now controlled the most valuable technology company in the world, not through hostile takeover, but through the undeniable evidence that inclusive excellence wasn't just morally right, but financially optimal. Backstage, she was met by Rebecca Chen, once an overlooked engineer at Barnes Technologies, now Chief Research Officer at Wright Technologies, and architect of the quantum neural interface that would transform modern computing. "Your keynote was brilliant," Rebecca said, genuine admiration in her voice. "But you didn't mention the most remarkable statistic, that Wright Technologies employs more women and underrepresented minorities in leadership positions than the next 5 technology companies combined." Imani smiled warmly. "That statistic is important, but it's a means rather than an end. The real achievement is proving that diversity drives innovation when artificial barriers are removed. Our demographic composition isn't virtue signaling, it's competitive advantage." As they walked toward the executive reception area, Rebecca lowered her voice. "Have you heard the latest about Maxwell?" Imani nodded slightly. After years of legal defeats and public humiliation, Maxwell Barnes had finally accepted the reality that his family's company had been transformed beyond recognition, and for the better. He had approached Wright Technologies not as entitled heir but as humbled applicant, requesting opportunity to contribute in whatever capacity might be appropriate. He completed the Senior Leadership Inclusion Training Program, Imani confirmed. 300 hours of direct engagement with communities systematically excluded from technological opportunity. His reflection papers showed genuine evolution in perspective, not just politically correct language, but fundamental reconsideration of structural barriers. "And you're seriously considering bringing him back?" Rebecca asked, obvious skepticism in her voice. "After everything he did?" Imani considered this question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Transformation isn't meaningful if it only applies to those who already agree with us. Maxwell has completed every step we required to demonstrate genuine change. His technical skills remain valuable, and his first-hand experience with the consequences of discrimination could make him a powerful advocate for inclusive practices." Rebecca remained unconvinced. "Or he could revert to type the moment he regains influence." "That's always possible," Imani acknowledged. "But we've built systems that no longer depend on individual virtue. Our compensation structures, promotion criteria, and innovation incentives are designed to reward excellence regardless of its source. Even if Maxwell's personal evolution isn't genuine, the systems we've created would prevent him from causing the kind of harm he once did." This represented perhaps Imani's most significant achievement, transforming not just individual attitudes but institutional structures. Wright Technologies had reimagined every aspect of corporate operation, from hiring practices to compensation systems, from promotion criteria to innovation incentives. The result was an organization where excellence could no longer be suppressed based on irrelevant characteristics. The executive reception buzzed with industry leaders eager to understand Wright Technologies' extraordinary success. CEOs who had once dismissed diversity initiatives as political correctness now sought Imani's insights on implementing similar programs at their own companies, not from moral awakening but economic self-interest. "Dr. Wright," called a voice from across the room. Imani turned to find Elise Johnson, CEO of Quantum Dynamics, one of Wright Technologies' few remaining competitors. "I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." Imani excused herself from her current conversation and joined Elise in a quieter corner of the reception area. "I'll be direct," Elise began without preamble. "We've been trying to reverse engineer your success for 3 years without matching your results. Our technical talent is comparable, our R&D budget is competitive, but our innovation output is barely 30% of yours, and we can't figure out why." Imani smiled slightly. "Have you considered that your technical talent isn't actually comparable? Our recruiting targets the same top universities," Elise objected. "We offer competitive compensation packages. We've even implemented diversity hiring targets similar to yours." "That's the fundamental misconception," Imani replied. "Our advantage isn't from diversity hiring targets. It's from removing systematic barriers that prevent all talent from contributing at maximum capacity. It's not about who you hire. It's about whose ideas get developed, whose contributions get recognized, and whose innovations get rewarded." Elise frowned slightly. "I don't understand the distinction." "Let me put it differently," Imani suggested. "What percentage of patents filed by your company come from women and underrepresented minorities?" "About 12%, Elise replied after brief consideration, "which roughly matches their representation in our technical workforce." Quote, "At Wright Technologies, That figure is 47%, Imani said. Not because we hire differently, but because we've created environments where everyone feels empowered to contribute their full creative capacity, where ideas are evaluated based on merit rather than source, where innovation is rewarded regardless of title or background. Elise absorbed this with growing comprehension. So it's not about demographic composition, but about unleashing potential that already exists? Exactly, Imani confirmed. Diversity isn't valuable because it checks boxes on regulatory forms. It's valuable because different perspectives generate different solutions, but only when those perspectives are genuinely valued rather than merely tolerated. As Elise departed with thoughtful expression, William Williams approached with the day's market report. "Stock hit another all-time high after your keynote," he said, displaying the tablet showing Wright Technologies' remarkable trajectory since the merger and rebranding. "The market recognizes value when it sees it," Imani replied. "How are institutional investors responding to the foundation announcement?" "Overwhelmingly positive," William confirmed. 5 years ago, they would have seen a $10 billion commitment to community investment as shareholder value destruction. Today, they recognize it as strategic competitive advantage in talent acquisition and development. This represented perhaps the most profound transformation Imani had engineered, changing how the market itself evaluated corporate decisions. What had once been dismissed as social responsibility, separate from business performance, was now recognized as essential strategy for companies competing on innovation. "And the Maxwell situation?" William asked carefully. "The board will support whatever you decide, but there are strong opinions on both sides." Imani nodded thoughtfully. "I'm meeting with him tomorrow. His formal application for the Director of Legacy Integration position demonstrates significant evolution and perspective, but I want to assess his sincerity directly." The following morning, Imani arrived at Wright Technologies headquarters, the architectural marvel that had replaced the outdated Barnes Technologies campus shortly after the merger. Quantum glass panels adjusted transparency based on optimal lighting conditions. Collaborative spaces flowed seamlessly into private focus areas. Every aspect of the building had been designed to maximize creative interaction while accommodating diverse working styles. As she entered her office, a space deliberately designed to be accessible rather than imposing, her assistant notified her that Maxwell Barnes had arrived for their scheduled meeting. "Send him in," Imani instructed, preparing herself for a conversation that represented the final chapter in a transformation that had begun 5 years earlier in a basement office with obsolete equipment. Maxwell Barnes entered with none of the entitlement that had once characterized his presence. 5 years of professional exile and public accountability had fundamentally altered his demeanor. The arrogant CEO who had once demoted Imani to punish her independence had been replaced by a humbled applicant seeking opportunity to contribute to the company that had once borne his family name. "Dr. Wright," he began, the formal address itself representing evolution from his previous dismissive approach. "Thank you for considering my application and meeting with me personally." Imani gestured to the visitor's chair, maintaining professional courtesy. "Your application materials show considerable effort toward understanding the systematic barriers we're working to dismantle. I'd like to hear in your own words what you've learned during your time away from the company." Maxwell nodded, obvious discomfort crossing his features but no trace of the resentment that had once defined their interactions. "I've learned that systems I benefited from without questioning were actively harmful to people with capabilities exceeding my own. I've learned that my inheritance of positional authority prevented me from recognizing the actual sources of value creation. And I've learned that transformation isn't about political correctness, but about unlocking human potential that has been systematically suppressed." Imani studied him carefully, looking for signs of performative agreement masking unchanged beliefs. What she saw instead was something unexpected. Genuine humility born from 5 years of watching from the sidelines as the company his family had built achieved unprecedented success precisely by rejecting the leadership approach he had embodied. "Those are compelling insights," she acknowledged. "But why should Wright Technologies bring you back in any capacity? What value can you contribute that couldn't be provided by someone without your history of discrimination?" Maxwell considered this question with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "Precisely because of that history, I represent the old paradigm that Wright Technologies has superseded. My personal transformation from entitled heir to humble contributor could serve as powerful testimony to others still resistant to necessary change." This answer surprised Imani with its self-awareness. The Maxwell Barnes who had once demoted her out of wounded pride would never have positioned himself as cautionary example rather than entitled leader. The position you've applied for, Director of Legacy Integration, would involve helping traditional companies implement the inclusive innovation frameworks we've developed, Imani explained. It would require you to directly confront executives exhibiting the same behaviors you once demonstrated. Are you prepared for that challenge? I believe my first-hand experience makes me uniquely qualified, Maxwell replied. I understand their perspective because I once shared it. I can speak directly to the false assumptions underlying resistance to change because I once maintained those assumptions myself. And I can provide testimony to the transformative impact of inclusive excellence because I've witnessed it from both sides. As their conversation continued, Imani recognized that Maxwell's transformation, while imperfect and ongoing, was fundamentally genuine. The man who had once attempted to diminish her brilliance now fully acknowledged it. The executive who had once maintained systematic barriers now worked to dismantle them. The heir who had once claimed ownership over others, innovations now recognized the moral and financial necessity of rewarding excellence regardless of its source. I'm prepared to approve your application, Imani decided after thorough discussion, with specific conditions regarding ongoing demonstration of your commitment to our core principles. You'll begin with a 6-month probationary period, reporting directly to Rebecca Chen in research operations. Maxwell nodded with evident gratitude rather than entitlement. Thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Wright. I recognize the significance of your willingness to consider my application despite our history. As he left, Imani reflected on the cyclical nature of transformation. The man who had once demoted her to a basement office would now work several levels below her in the organizational structure, reporting to a woman whose brilliance he had previously dismissed. The company that had once borne his family name had been rebranded to acknowledge its true source of value. The innovation he had once derided as fantasy now powered the most valuable technology enterprise in the world. But Imani's satisfaction came not from personal vindication, but from systematic transformation. Wright Technologies had become a model for the industry, proving that recognizing and rewarding excellence regardless of its packaging wasn't just morally right, but financially optimal. The quantum neural interface that would transform human interaction with technology had emerged not from traditional innovation structures, but from collaborative environments, where diverse perspectives generated solutions that homogeneous teams could never imagine. 5 years after her basement demotion, Imani Wright had engineered not just corporate transformation, but industry revolution. The technology sector that had systematically marginalized brilliance in diverse packaging now competed aggressively to implement the inclusive frameworks she had pioneered. Companies that maintained traditional barriers to advancement watched their innovation capacity and market value decline relative to those embracing the Wright Technologies model. The message had become undeniable. In the knowledge economy, the most valuable resource is human potential fully expressed. Organizations that remove artificial barriers to that expression gain competitive advantage that cannot be matched by those maintaining systems of exclusion. As Imani prepared for her next meeting, a collaborative session with research teams developing applications for the quantum neural interface, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from basement demotion to industry transformation. The patent portfolio that had given her leverage against Maxwell's discrimination had expanded to include technological innovations that would benefit humanity for generations to come. The basement office where Maxwell had attempted to contain her brilliance was now preserved as historical exhibit in the Wright Technologies Museum, a reminder of what happens when organizations fail to recognize excellence regardless of its packaging. The future belonged to companies smart enough to embrace talent in all its forms, and the industry had finally learned that fundamental truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.